The torpedo was already in the water. The Iranian captain didn't know his submarine had been a ghost in American files for 6 days. At exactly 6:17 in the morning, in the gray silence beneath the Gulf of Oman, a decision was made that could have ended in fire and wreckage. Captain Reza Hosseini, commanding officer of the Iranian Kilo-class submarine Tareq, gave the order he had trained his entire career to give. He pressed every calculation, every risk, every prayer into that single word: fire. The USS heavyweight torpedo launched from Tube 1 with a hydraulic whisper, a 533mm cylinder of Cold War engineering sliding into the dark water. At 23 knots, it began its journey toward a target 18 miles distant. Behind it, a copper guidance wire spooled out like a lifeline, Hosseini's only connection to the weapon as it moved through the deep. On the surface, 13 nautical miles to the northeast, the USS Harry S. Truman moved through the morning sea like a floating city. 90 acres of American steel and aviation fuel, 5,000 sailors, dozens of aircraft, a strike group surrounding her in every direction. She was not just a warship, she was a statement, a declaration written in the language of tonnage and titanium. Hosseini had been watching her for 2 hours, long enough to feel that electric certainty that soldiers feel in the moment before they pull the trigger, long enough to believe, truly believe, that this was his moment, that he had positioned his boat perfectly, that the geometry of the kill was in his favor. He had no idea that he was already inside the trap. The Tareq was a Kilo-class submarine, one of 3 purchased by Iran from Russia in the 1990s. 74 meters of Soviet engineering, displacing 3,076 tons when submerged. 6 torpedo tubes, 18 weapons aboard. The hull was coated in anechoic tiles designed to absorb sonar pings and scatter acoustic energy. Western intelligence had nicknamed these boats black holes for how silently they moved through the water. Under ideal conditions, a Kilo could detect enemy submarines at distances 3 to 4 times greater than it could be detected itself. Those were ideal conditions. This was not ideal. This was the Gulf of Oman in 2024, and the Americans had been mapping these waters, every thermal layer, every current, every acoustic shadow for 50 years. 12 miles to the northeast of the Tareq, another Iranian submarine held position. The Conqueror, a Fateh-class boat, an indigenous Iranian design commissioned in 2019, smaller than the Kilo at 600 tons. 4 torpedo tubes, but in some ways more significant because it represented something the Kilo did not: progress. Iranian engineers learning to build submarines from scratch. The Conqueror carried the latest Iranian torpedoes, including the oxygen-powered Valfajr design, which Iranian Naval Command claimed had advanced countermeasure capability. Both submarines were hunting. Neither of them had any idea they were already caught. 3 United States Navy Virginia-class attack submarines had been tracking the Tareq since the moment she left her home port of Bandar Abbas 6 days earlier. Every course change had been logged. Every dive, every turn, every increase in engine RPM. The acoustic signature of the Tareq's propulsion system was filed in databases stretching from Norfolk to Pearl Harbor. American sonar operators aboard the USS Mississippi, sitting 2,000 yards directly behind the Tareq at a depth of 400 feet, had heard every valve turn aboard the Iranian submarine, every pump cycle, every quiet word between crewmen during the night watch. The Iranians thought they were hunters, they were exhibits, and the torpedo was in the water. 47 seconds. That was all it took. 47 seconds after the torpedo left the tube, the BQQ-10 sonar suite aboard the USS Mississippi had already classified what happened. The acoustic signature of the tube door opening, the pressure equalization, the specific launch transient, the precise underwater sound profile of a SUT torpedo moving at 23 knots, all of it matched against reference libraries built over decades. The fire control computer calculated intercept solutions for 2 Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes in 90 seconds. 2 weapons, 2 targets, 2 guaranteed kills. The math was already solved. The order just had to come. In the command centers of the carrier strike group, the watch officers received the data from Mississippi. The situation was clear within minutes. 2 hostile submarines had revealed themselves. One had fired, the other was preparing to. The rules of engagement had been met. A legal, tactical, military response was available and ready. The order that came back was not what anyone might have expected: do not fire. Instead, a single command was transmitted to the Mississippi: 1 ping, active sonar, close range, maximum power. The Mississippi sonar array discharged the 170 decibels of focused acoustic energy directly into the Tareq's hull. To understand what 170 decibels feels like inside a submerged metal cylinder, it is not a sound you hear, it is a sound you feel. In your chest, in the bones behind your eyes, in the fillings of your teeth. Pipes rattle, equipment shakes. Every man aboard knows instantly and completely that something has found them. Captain Hosseini felt it. In that frozen heartbeat, that half second between the ping and the realization, Hosseini understood everything. His submarine had been found. Not just found, watched, tracked, studied. The silence he had trusted for 6 days had been an illusion. Somewhere behind him in the darkness, a vessel he had never once detected had been shadowing his every move, and it had just reached out and touched his hull to make certain he understood. We see you. We have seen you. We are aimed at you right now. The copper wire connecting Hosseini to his torpedo suddenly felt very fragile. The Tareq could not maneuver without snapping it. She was committed to holding position. She was exposed. She was in every tactical sense that mattered already dead, kept alive only by the decision of the men tracking her. The SA-2 torpedo ran on. It would continue for 11 minutes before its fuel exhausted and it sank. $1.2 million in Iranian military hardware, descending quietly to rest on the seafloor alongside whalebones and Cold War wreckage. It never came close to the Truman. It was never going to. 12 miles to the northeast, the Conqueror had a different experience. The USS Oregon, another Virginia-class attack submarine that had been tracking the Fateh-class boat since Bandar Abbas, chose a different method of communication. The Oregon did not ping, it spoke. A single encrypted message was transmitted via underwater acoustic communication, a direct submarine-to-submarine data link that should not have been possible unless the sender knew the recipient's exact position, depth, and communications protocols. The message was brief, clinical, absolute. We recommend immediate surface. This is your only warning. The Conqueror's captain read those words on his sonar display. The message included coordinates, depth readings. It included the Oregon's name, precise details that confirmed what the words already made clear. They had been known, tracked, and owned since the day they left port. The Conqueror had never once detected the Oregon and never heard a sound, never picked up a signature, and yet the Oregon knew everything. The Conqueror surfaced without firing a shot. Meanwhile, the USS Harry S. Truman continued on her heading without a single degree of course change, not a knot of speed adjustment. Her escorting destroyers held formation, her air wing continued scheduled flight operations. 5,000 sailors went about the rhythms of their day, maintenance, meals, briefings, sleep, because the threat posed by 2 Iranian submarines targeting the carrier had been managed without interrupting breakfast. That deliberate, unbroken indifference was itself a message. Not spoken, not transmitted, just demonstrated in the most direct language available. You do not frighten us, you do not impress us, you do not even register on our list of concerns this morning. But the intelligence gathered in those 2 hours was extraordinary. Every acoustic signature from both submarines had been recorded and cataloged with precision that Iranian engineers could not have imagined. The Tareq's maximum diving depth had been demonstrated during an earlier portion of the patrol. The Conqueror's fire control radar emissions during the targeting sequence had been mapped completely. The Valfajr torpedo never left its tube, but its targeting protocols were now understood. Iran had come to the Gulf of Oman with secrets. They left without a single one. The total American expenditure for the engagement: 1 active sonar ping, 1 encrypted message, 0 torpedoes, 0 fuel beyond standard patrol consumption, no personnel placed at elevated risk. 3 Virginia-class submarines operating on scheduled patrol had neutralized 2 hostile submarines using nothing more than information and the precision application of restrained force. The Tareq broke the surface at 6:38 in the morning, 21 minutes after the torpedo launch. 64 Iranian sailors climbed onto the deck and stared at blue water stretching to every horizon. No American ships visible, no aircraft overhead, nothing, just the sea and the sky and the absolute crushing knowledge of what had just happened beneath the surface. Somewhere below them, at depths they could not see and distances they could not calculate, submarines they had never detected were still there, still watching, still aimed. There is a version of this story where 64 men do not climb back onto a deck in the morning light. There is a version where the order came through, where 2 Mark 48 torpedoes were released from the Mississippi, where the mathematics were allowed to complete themselves. The Tareq would have broken apart at depth, flooding in seconds. The Conqueror would have followed. 128 men, husbands, sons, fathers who had kissed their children goodbye at the dock in Bandar Abbas and promised to return. That version did not happen.
Not because the Americans lacked the capability, not because the engagement was close. It did not happen because the men who held those weapons in their hands, who had every legal and tactical justification to use them, chose something harder than destruction. They chose restraint. Within 48 hours, Revolutionary Guard Naval Command in Tehran sat through classified briefings that shattered the operational assumptions their submarine doctrine had been built upon. Their boats were not invisible. Their torpedoes were not unstoppable. The coastal geography they had counted on for concealment, the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Oman, did not belong to Iran. It had never belonged to Iran. It belonged to whoever controlled the information, and the information had belonged to America since the Cold War, when underwater sensor arrays were first planted on the seafloor and never stopped being upgraded. Iranian state media released carefully edited statements describing successful training exercises conducted in international waters. Domestic propaganda, carefully worded, designed to manage a story that had no good ending. The Truman's navigation logs told a different story. 0 course deviations, 0 speed changes, $13 billion of American naval power moving serenely through water where 2 submarines had tried and failed to matter. This is what modern deterrence looks like when it works perfectly. Not explosions, not body counts, not the kind of victory that fills news cycles and requires diplomatic explanations. It looks like a single sonar ping. It looks like a message transmitted directly to an enemy captain's display containing his own coordinates, in his own waters, from a vessel he never once detected. It looks like 64 men standing on a deck in the morning sun, alive and knowing exactly why. There is something worth sitting with in that image. 64 men, sailors, men who served their country, followed their orders, climbed into a submarine and did what they were trained to do. They fired on the most powerful naval force in human history and they survived it. Not because their weapon was effective, not because their stealth held, but because the men targeting them decided that intelligence was worth more than wreckage. Because winning without destroying is its own kind of power. The underwater realm has its own laws, its own silence, its own brutality. It does not care about speeches or flags or declarations. It only cares about preparation, about who trained harder, who invested more, who built better systems, who sat in the dark longer and listened more carefully. The men aboard the Mississippi and the Oregon had done all of that, had spent careers in pressure hulls, learning to hear things no one else could hear, tracking targets no one else could find. They were professionals in the truest sense of the word. They won completely. And then they let the losing side go home. In Bandar Abbas, 64 sailors eventually walked off their boat and back to their families. They drank tea, they slept in their own beds. Their children ran to them at the door. None of them will ever fully explain to those children what happened in the Gulf of Oman that morning, how close the math came to completing itself, how many seconds stood between them and the sea floor, how it felt to surface in defeat and stand on the deck and stare at an empty horizon, knowing that somewhere beneath it, invisible, something still watched. They survived because the Americans who held the trigger decided that the lesson was worth more than the kill. That is not weakness. Do not mistake it for weakness. It is the most sophisticated form of power that exists, the ability to destroy completely, and the discipline to choose otherwise when the calculation calls for it. To send a message that only professionals understand in a language spoken only at depth, in the dark far from any audience. The Tareq fired her torpedo at 6:17 in the morning. By 6:38 she had surfaced. By the time the Truman's crew was eating breakfast, the incident was over. Filed, archived, added to the long, quiet record of things that happen beneath the surface of the world's oceans that the public never sees and history barely notes. But the men who were there know. The ones who fired, the ones who listened, the ones who had to decide in 90 seconds whether to end 128 lives or send a message instead. They know exactly what happened, and exactly what it cost, and exactly what it was worth. The ocean kept its silence, the way it always does. It swallows secrets whole.